Hi, welcome to the Law Society. Not sure how many of you have been to the building before, but we are in the bencher room. This is where our benchers, also known as our board, meet 10 times a year. So welcome to the 2017 Law and Media Workshop. The title of our workshop tonight is Moving Targets and Loss Control, Legal Implications of Social Media. We're really pleased to welcome members of the media here from newspapers, radio, television, and freelance journalists as well. I'm Vinnie Ewan, and I'm the Communications Officer at the Law Society of BC, and I'll be tonight's moderator. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations hosts in Vancouver, the Coast Salish people, in particular the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, on whose traditional territories we're holding this workshop, and we thank them for their hospitality. So the Law and Media Workshop is a partnership between the Law Society and the Jack Webster Foundation, and we've been putting on this workshop since 1994. As journalists, you're probably all very familiar with the work of Jack Webster. Some of you were probably at the dinner a few weeks ago. You may or may not be familiar with the Law Society's role. So the Law Society is the regulator for the legal profession in BC. Our role is to protect the public, and we set and enforce standards of professional conduct for lawyers. We also bring a voice to issues affecting the justice system and the delivery of legal services in BC. We're governed by our benchers, and 25 of our benchers are lawyers, and they're elected by lawyers across the province. 6 of our benchers are non-lawyers, and they are appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council to bring the public perspective, not only to the decisions that are made by benchers, but also to our hearing panels and our committees. Actually, Mr. Jack Webster was a bencher of the Law Society. He was one of the first 2 non-lawyers benchers appointed to the bencher table. And we're very pleased to have 2 of our benchers here with us tonight, Mr. Tony Wilson QC and Elizabeth Robotham. And thank you very much for joining us. Tonight, we're going to look at a fictitious scenario involving an online vigilante group. They're called the Pedo Police in this fictitious scenario. Thanks, Dan. And they're very similar to the Creep Catchers group in recent news.
How did you come up with that name? Tell us the story behind it.
We'll be covering legal issues on reporting on social media posts, monitoring Facebook comments, using screenshots, and revealing identities of those who are involved in online allegations. So just so everyone's clear, every name and every face is used for educational purposes only, and it's entirely fictional. And along the way, our panelists are going to weigh in with their expertise and experience. So I'm pleased to introduce you to our panelists. First, we have Dan Burnett QC. He leads Owen Bird Law Corporation. He's a leading lawyer in defamation and media law, and he's taken some of those cases all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. He was called to the BC Bar in 1988, and he also teaches media law at UBC. Second, we have Wendy Cox, who is the BC and Alberta editor for the Globe and Mail. Prior to her role at the Globe, she worked for the Canadian Press. She's worked as a reporter in newsrooms in Toronto and Winnipeg. She was a politics reporter in the Ontario and BC legislatures. She was also news editor and later bureau chief for the Canadian Press. Third, we have Ludmilla Herbst, QC. She's a litigator and partner at Ferris Vaughan, Wills & Murphy, LLP. She practices in a wide range of areas, including defamation and media litigation, and she's appeared as counsel for media outlets such as the Vancouver Sun. She's also the assistant editor and contributor to The Advocate, a legal journal that circulated to BC lawyers. Fun fact, Ludmilla was actually awarded the Law Society Gold Medal when she graduated from UBC in 1998. And the gold medal is awarded to graduating law students with the highest grade point average. Lastly, we have Kirk Lapointe, who is the editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver Media Group and a vice president of parent company Glacier Media. He's also a daily talk show host at Roundhouse Radio and a professor at the UBC Graduate School of Journalism. His previous roles include CBC Ombudsman, managing editor at the Vancouver Sun, Senior Vice President for the CTV Television Network, Founding Executive Editor of the National Post, and Associate Publisher and Editor-in-Chief of the Hamilton Spectator. Kirk also ran for mayor in 2014. So just a few more housekeeping details for tonight. We are filming this workshop, and we're going to be putting it on YouTube and also our website for people who have missed it. So if you don't wish to be filmed, please let us know. As we progress through the scenario, we'll pause to take questions from the audience. For our panelists, please put up your hand, and myself, Kelly, who's outside, but she'll be in here for in a few moments, and Nora will come by with the mic. We just want to record your questions for the video as well as to amplify your voice so we can all hear you. And we encourage you to share this on your Twitter. Please refer to your schedule of events for the hashtag. It's on the back on the second page. So before we jump into our scenario, Dan Burnett's going to introduce us to the scenario and talk a little bit about who's going to answer which questions and what their role is.
So some stories are icky, and some stories that are icky you either can't or choose not to turn away from. So that's tonight. It's all pretend. None of the people whose names or pictures you're going to see are actual pedophiles. The
legal disclaimer for the evening.
There we go. They're nice guys. So playing the role, and part of the pretend is who gets to play what role, with the exception of Ludmilla, who is indeed playing kind of her real role. But
I was expecting to be shocked now that you were telling something else.
So playing the role of co-editors of a newly reformulated Vancouver Sun are Wendy and Kirk. There's a person not in the room who you will see referenced, who's their crack reporter, who Wendy was able to bring over to the Sun from the Globe, named Kathy Tomlinson. Little tip of the hat to one of our panelists from last year. And as we go, just emphasize, please do get up your hand, jump in. It's way more productive and helpful for everybody to hear some of the experience that's in the room, because there's a wealth of it here. So don't be shy, and mics will get to you, and we can get going. So with that, let's kick it off.
Okay. So we're going to kick off the scenario with an email from Kathy to Wendy Cox. Wendy, I'm so sick of real estate. Can I get some resources to really dig into this vigilante group? They're claiming to catch men who are trying to lure kids into sex. Some of their catches have resulted in criminal charges. And here's a website. What do you think?
Yeah, well, why don't we have a look at the website, and then we'll...
This is the... Oh, there we go. So this is a website. We've got some pictures. There's the links to their Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And yeah.
What I'd like to do before we start turning on some of the legal considerations is I'd like to get Wendy and Kirk to kind of weigh in on just, lawyers don't run newspapers. Editors and newspaper people run those and seek advice. But before you kind of get to what are the concerns, Ludmilla, what kind of things are going through your minds in terms of editorial decisions, whether you'd even pursue this story, if you did, how you would go about it? Want to take it first, Kirk?
Well, I could back out and say that a business in Vancouver would be simply examining whether there was a viable business model for this. But no, we're all in on this one this evening, so I'm good. No, I think what we teach, and I think what we attempt to practice day by day, are journalism with 4 basic principles in mind around codes of ethics. A couple of them are pretty obvious ones. Accountability. We really try to make institutions accountable, and we try to make each other accountable. Independence. We want to make ourselves free of favor and conflicts to the greatest degree possible, or disclose them when we have them. Truth-seeking, I think, is one that everybody in the room would likely be quite quite adhered to around accuracy and pursuing what I usually say we don't publish the truth as much as we pursue it, and then publish what we believe in our hearts is true at deadline, and so that's about as good as we get. And then the fourth one is the toughest one of all. It's the one that I think we contend with all the time, and would in this work here, which is the effort to minimize harm. And it's a very conscious, deliberate approach of reflexive behavior when you're approaching stories, applying your situated knowledge properly to your stories, asking yourself, what is it about you that's pursuing a story like this? Trying to make sure that you're not re-traumatizing, that you're gaining consent and a form of informed consent in all of this. And in the absence of being able to do those types of things, asking yourself really critically if you need to do what you think you instinctively have to do in cases like this. So that's where I get grounded in all of this one. And I think in this case here, we'll end up exploring this all night, but that's where I would start with this one here, which is, do we need to tell the story fully? How is it that we can tell the story and still provide the community with what we would believe to be in the public interest, the facts of the matter, and what are the other consequences as we proceed that we need to, at every step, think about.
Wendy?
I wish I was that deep.
Oh.
Mostly if Kathy Tomlinson came to me and said, I want to check these guys out, we would have a conversation about who they are and what it is that we're looking after. There's clearly a tension there between rights. They are pursuing things that presumably the police should be pursuing, but I think part of the scenario is that they've had some success in the past, and I don't think we have the answers to a lot of questions that Kirk's talking about unless we go looking. There is no harm at this point in looking. If this is Kathy Tomlinson and we're pretending that Kathy is Kathy, she's got
Can't stop her anyway.
yeah, exactly. And so you'd say, okay, let's go find out what we can find out. The conversation about what we do with it and where we're headed can't really be determined until we make the initial look. This will get tougher as it goes along, but in terms of in this scenario, if I'm confronted with a senior investigative reporter who wants to check them out, sure, let me know what you find out.
Instinctively, is the story that jumps to you the most? Who are these people and why are they being vigilantes, or is the story, who are these people they're catching?
I don't think we know. And instinctively, part of it is why is there a bandwidth for these guys to do what they're doing? Why is this not completely in the purview of the police? Is it because the police don't have the resources? Is it because the police are falling down in some way? Ultimately, I think when you're looking into this, those are some of the questions you'd ask. Why has there been the creation of this group? And if you go down the road and find that, well, it's because they're breaking all the rules, then that's another part of the story.
Let's go to the next slide.
So here they're looping in Ludmilla on the legal concerns of this pedo police website. Ludmilla looping you in on this email from Kathy below. See any legal concerns? Wendy.
So Ludmilla, sometimes this happens in my practice where it's like, okay, we're at a big picture stage. What are all the problems that you can foresee? Which of course requires you to be a little bit of a mind reader, but can you lay some of the concerns out that you would identify?
Sure, and I think they arise looking ahead two ways, and it loops back a bit to Dan's point about, do you see this more as a story about why are these people vigilantes? What's the take here on the vigilante group, or who are the people that they're trying to catch? And there are differing tensions and differing dynamics that arise depending on which way the story is ultimately going to go, if the story does get somewhere. So from the perspective of, if you end up looking to focus on, who are the people being caught, are you actually suggesting or thinking to suggest down the road that the people that the pedo police are after have done something wrong? clearly there's a potential defamation concern, because down the road you may be suggesting that the people that are in the sights of the pedo police have actually committed some sort of terrible crimes. And sex assault being a blazing defamatory, you can hardly get perhaps a more defamatory label on somebody than a perpetrator of something like this. And so down the road, you're going to have to balance whether and how far you go in suggesting that through your story, that a crime has been committed and that this sort of crime has been committed. And knowing, as Dan does, that there's a sister organization, perhaps called the Creep Catchers, you've got at the back of your mind that there actually have been defamation lawsuits started. So, of course, one of the things that you weigh in thinking about defamation down the road is there something that's going to be defamatory potentially? And is somebody actually likely to sue on the defamation? And here you've got some instances where people have gotten incensed enough by the threats to their reputation and the potential harm to their reputation that they have. So there's a real issue here on that score. Another issue that's come up is, again, with sister organization, Creep Catchers, and you can already tell a bit from the nature of the online presence that the pedo police have, that they might be going down the same route. Is there going to be an infringement of privacy in terms of the people that they've targeted? And there's been a complaint that was laid to the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner about the sort of videos that sister organization CC has put on its website, and actually has led to a finding that privacy has been breached of targets, and in order to destroy some of the material that's gone up. So that's something in the back of your mind as well. There's a suggestion here in Kathy's email that there's been a result in some cases, at least, in criminal charges. So also twigged in one's mind has to be the potential of subjudice contempt in what you ultimately publish, and needing to be mindful of not interfering with the court process through sort of presumptive conclusions as to guilt or innocence of guilt really of the people involved. And then I'll just plant this at the back of people's minds as well. There's been the suggestion as well that again, sister organization engages itself in criminal activity, that perhaps some of the faces on the website may signal. So chasing down people and assaulting them, perhaps even engaging in a form of child pornography in their own right through some of the scenarios that they put up there. So all this is associated potentially with running a story about the pedo police and their prey. On the flip side of that, and I again, getting back to what the focus of a story ultimately will be, also may have to step back and look at this from the perspective of pedo police. So if the take on this is going to be, this is a vigilante group that's running around half crazed or more fully crazed around town pursuing people, is that allegation itself defamatory of pedo police? I suspect, given what's on this website, that they might not care. They might like the vigilante label. They might, good, say that about me all you want. But might that be itself a defamatory allegation? Are you going to be somehow, in the course of your story, suggesting that they commit criminal acts? And in that respect, also potentially defaming them as criminal in nature or criminal in behavior. So as we sometimes say at our office, this case raises a lot of interesting issues. As a client, you don't necessarily want to hear that your case raises interesting issues, but there's a lot of layers there. For a lawyer and a law school exam, this is perfect.
We want you to solve our interesting issues. We don't want them raised.
Well,
yeah.
Just on slide 3, it's okay.
That gives us some pretty good coverage of some of the editorial thoughts, some of the legal big picture things that might tickle. But let's move forward as the organization starts to get into some specific allegations.
So we're going to move on and we're going to look at their Twitter feed. They say, check out our latest catch on our Facebook page. Here's their Facebook page, and they've posted announcing major bus live stream event, January 10th, 2017. High noon via Facebook Live.
So this is one of the features, the most obvious feature of social media issues is sort of the immediacy. Facebook Live might be the most clear example where there's nothing in between an event and it being made widely public. So, if you're, Kathy, and you're watching this piece, presumably you're on high alert for some big announcement that's going to come down on Facebook Live. So you're going to be watching when it happens, and here we are.
Yeah, so this is live right now. PP, Pedo Police, nabs Dr. Victor Frung. That's him, and that's his chat. So in the chat, you can see him talking to somebody who says, I'm 13, but I've been around. Do you have lots of money? Oh, yes, I really need a massage. Think you can help? I can meet anytime. And then he or she or whoever's speaking says, Wendy's at 8 o'clock. And that's the chat on the screen.
That's the confrontation outside the Wendy's or nearby the Wendy's. Mm-hmm. And you've probably seen some of these where the person's yelling, you're guilty, you're a pedophile, things that you wouldn't need a lawyer to tell you would be a big problem to run right off the bat. But you move to some questions, I think, that Kathy poses to Kirk in the next email.
Yeah, so Kathy writes an email to Kirk, and she says, Kirk, they're streaming live right now, showing the confrontation with this doctor, Victor Frung. They're showing the chat between him and a 13-year-old where he asks for a massage. I had a heads up on the name and found his photo on his medical office website. It's him. I also called the College of Physicians, and they say he has voluntarily suspended practice while they are looking into a complaint from a female. Can we go with this? Can we run the video? King 5 in Seattle ran it live.
Yeah, of course. Well, since you're the one being asked, why don't you kick it off, Kirk, with thoughts on that whole little nest of questions that kind of come up?
Dear Kathy, I'm on holidays until
Wendy is covering this desk today.
Wendy seems prepared to answer any and all questions. Okay, so there is a basket of them in here. First of all, technology, of course, permits you to race to the bottom so many times, and you can go with it if that's where you want to go. I mean, I think Linda Ellerby once said that if people had their way, there would be a channel of only car crashes and car chases. That if that's what we want to do. Well, first of all, there's a bunch of things in here that are a mess. Of course, whole other regime of law below the border that we would have to weigh ourselves against. There appears, there is information in here about this person that seems to me, on the surface of it, to be somewhat germane, which is that the College of Physicians has suspended somebody with a complaint, but that's divorced from all of this other stuff. And all of this other stuff is, in my view, not worth getting in on. We operate with a discipline of verification. There are a lot of elements so far that just lack any of that verification. The texts that are seemingly between a couple of people, do we really know who these people are? And so would we carry a text exchange? The nature of the accusation in this case, where does it even really come from? I go back to your earlier question. Where would we jump as journalists? And I think to be fair, I think journalists do want at times to do the police work on their own. They kind of have this, this desire to somehow put out fires or lead to criminal charges. But in cases like this, where there are massive reputations at stake, I think journalists generally restrain themselves. They would more likely be trying to look at the phenomenon of the existence of an organization like this and what is it attempting to do, rather than dig right into the weeds on this and try to identify and go about essentially doing the work that the police ought to be doing. We've always been taught, and I think Wendy and I go back to Canadian Press days, where when you're in possession of information that has a germane criminal quality to it, you tell the police. You tell the police. You don't do that work on your own, as much as it's your instinct to be a hero or rescue something. So no, I'm telling Kathy that she needs to take a holiday now. So this is a little much.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the pedo police are not journalists. There's nothing about this Facebook Live or this chat that's journalism, at least in our newsroom. We could potentially look at it as a tip service, but the streaming thing has huge problems in terms of, my initial thinking is that it has huge problems in terms of the privacy. We don't know how, as an individual journalist, you don't know how it's been set up. You don't know whether this guy's been set up entirely. We don't know whether this text message is actually from him or not. We don't know. I mean, I personally or automatically sort of regard the pedo police as dodgy because I don't know why they're doing this or who they are or why they've sort of positioned themselves as being able to do this. When I go through Kathy's email, it's sort of like, okay, streaming live right now, don't care. In a confrontation with this Dr. Victor Fromm, okay, don't know who he is. Chat between him and a 13-year-old where he asks for a massage, don't care because I don't know where the massage or the chat came from. Found his photo on his medical office website. Okay, it's him. Okay, that's fine. As in terms of how pedo police, it's this part here. College of Physicians and Surgeons say that he is voluntary suspended practice while they're looking into a complaint against him from a female. Okay, so now I've got to do journalism. How prominent is this guy? Does this guy work with kids? Has he been suspended by the college? And is that something that the public needs to know? That's got nothing to do with pedo police. Pedo police has just provided me with this tip. So if I'm going to do anything with this, and we probably wouldn't, but if let's just say the newsroom is doing something about the opaqueness of the College of Physicians and Surgeons, which God knows is a legitimate story, or about doctors in general and their conduct with underage patients. I'm looking at that part of it as essentially a tip that I got to go chase. But the rest of this stuff, to me, is garbage.
Yeah. By the way, I think the climate has really rapidly changed just in the last number of weeks around complaints, and I think that's a good thing. And I think we're still coming to terms with what we're doing as a craft involving it. But I think we're at a historical turning point around this. And I think if journalism does its job wisely, it can participate in this without being reckless.
So Ludmilla, in let's say somebody comes to you, they have concluded that they like to at least stick the big toe into doing a bit of a story on this. What are you advising with respect to identity and identifying or not the individual?
The doctor in this case. I think at this stage, in respect of a story, and this answer is going to be very similar, I think, to Wendy's take from an editorial perspective. I think to the extent that this is a story about the pedo police, it's just way too risky and out of context and out of place to identify the doctor as the target. And this is a terrible additional factor to weigh in. But doctor immediately switching to my mind is that he's somebody who has money to sue, maybe, and has a big reputation in his view to defend, which by no means do I mean as a suggestion that anybody else's reputation is not worth preserving and protecting, but just from the analysis of, are you likely to face a lawsuit if you go wrong? This is a heightened scenario where you do so. And I think somebody's raised this on the panel as well, and I think maybe Kirk started with, you don't know, I mean, the chat itself, we don't know who it comes from. We may have the picture identified, but does that necessarily correlate with who had this back and forth? And so I think too much uncertainty. Eventually, maybe through the research that Wendy's suggested in terms of the College of Physicians and Surgeons angle, maybe down the road he could be identified in that context. But then again, just as a identification point, and here it's generic and bland, but you also have to keep in mind identifying the victim or alleged victim and concerns around that as well.
Well, let me ramp it up a little bit. Let's say
That's ramped up enough.
No, ramp up even more. Let's say that in unusual but not unheard of move, police actually make an announcement on this, and they actually confirm that they are investigating this doctor. They are investigating in relation to the very case that the pedo police have publicized. They condemn the pedo police for being vigilantes, but they assure the public is not at risk because the guy has suspended his practice voluntarily. Where are you at if all that happens?
Well, I mean, the charge hasn't, I mean, I'm thinking contempt possibility, but charge hasn't yet been laid. I suppose from a defamation perspective, oh no, see, I was thinking in a way, if the focus becomes more the real police condemning pedo police, you've got a bit of a story that takes the sting off this guy, because he's in a sense more of a victim, but then they're still suggesting that there's actually something wrong in this particular case with this guy. So, you know, I think I'd still be inclined not to suggest that there are risks with
Right.
putting up the name.
Right. Would that fact that I've added in shift you?
No, not yet, because you know, you mentioned putting your toe in the water on this one, but this is your whole body going in the deep end, and with some stones in your pockets, and I don't think that you're at that space yet where you lend credence to it. Look, I'd be actually very surprised if police said there was an individual being investigated. They would name the individual. In my experience, police will be as vague as they possibly can to avoid their own difficulties around these kind of cases. But even if they were to go that far, I think I'm still keeping chips off the table on this one.
I don't know, if the police went off on a rant about a group that,
A group, yes. An individual,
yeah, no, but if they went off on a rant about how, well, you know, the pedo police haven't exactly been helping, they've been out there stirring up the pot, their
Yeah.
tactics are not legal in any way. We've, like, let's say the guy's been charged. We've had enough information to charge this person, but that's not helpful. I think we'd have to include that, wouldn't we?
if the police said they had enough information to charge, then
Yeah, if he was charged.
then he's probably charged, or you need to be asking why not. And I think there have been plenty of stories written where the police have expressed great concern about the presence of any of these organizations in their communities, saying, "Wait a minute, you're not professionals. You know, any more than journalists complain you're not professionals." And everyone kind of gangs up here and says these guys aren't professionals. And I think that's fair. I think that's okay to discuss. Because it's, I think what we're trying, I think, in some cases with a story like this, is can we kind of come in the side door on the phenomenon without risking reputations prematurely before charges have been laid and before I think then it becomes a completely other issue. So I think if the police went off on a set to on the pedo police, then okay, you're going to talk about the expressed reservations that they have, or the anger that they have that these guys are getting in the way. I think that's a fair story for sure.
We had a question here. Kelly, if you could go over. Oh, you're good? Okay.
Okay. Well, we're gonna move to the next slide. Oh, before you do, question.
Is he going to ask Wendy the question? That's
He's
what I
not going to ask me a question.
The toughest question of the night.
So
Now,
let's say that you decide to do a story, and I think this would be the wrong approach, but you would do a story about a doctor being sort of nabbed up in this thing, but you blur the face or you don't name them, you just say it's a random doctor. Because we've had a situation, not we, but like there was a case with creep catchers where there was I think a principal at a school in the Fraser Valley, and some media outlets ran a story saying a principal or a teacher, but didn't name it, didn't have any information. But you're sort of inviting your readers to log on to creep catchers and find out for themselves who it is, and then it'd be clear from the face and from the name. So is there a legal risk there for, like, you're not naming the person, but you're definitely providing the tools for them to go and do their own research and discover this person's name?
Yeah.
That's actually our next slide, so
Yeah,
that
well,
you're
yeah.
way ahead of us.
Cue the next slide.
The point is a really good one. Like we're just going to imagine for a moment that Kirk and Wendy are both sick on the same day, and some more cavalier person was taking their desk, and they decided we're going with this. And how can we do it legally, Lidmilla? Well, you at least anonymize the guy. So let's see the slide.
Nailed it.
Nobody could tell. But the point is a very
I
good
recognize that belly.
one. Yeah, that's right.
It's like-
But the point is a very good one. I mean, it would ease in social media climate. We get used to, and over the years I've been doing this, there's been plenty of situations where the legal call has been to anonymize somebody. There's no charges yet. There might be other reasons to do that, but you're right. It's not hard for somebody to chase that down. And so how?
No, and within minutes, there's somebody on social media saying, "Here's the photo that the sun will not show you."
Right.
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 And then there's a story about the sun will not show you this. And you run right away, of course, into situations where there we go. Oh my goodness. Where a lot of members
Anonymized.
Yeah, exactly. Where a lot of members of the public are suddenly saying, well, whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? It's in our public interest to know this information. Why are you holding this information back? Why are you anonymizing this person? And that's why I say don't take a step forward, because you're really not taking one, you're taking about 15 steps forward. At least at this point.
See, I still don't think that we would be doing this story if there were no charges laid. If we go back to the scenario where charges had been laid, then I think we're doing the story based on what the actual police have told us, not what the pedo police have told us.
And there's we used to have policies in a couple of newsrooms that I've been in, where if someone is charged, if you're going to name that person, you then have to commit to carry that person's case all the way through. Mm-hmm. That you can't leave the public record, faulty, where you don't know what the resolution of the case was. So if charges are dropped, withdrawn, or if someone is found not guilty or guilty, you have that. And so in a couple of cases, we would, in some cases of charges being laid, if we didn't think that we were going to go all the way, and we would just have, a 38-year-old Hamilton man, 26-year-old Stony Creek woman was charged with this because first of all, we didn't think we had the resources to go all the way through.
What is the risk of this news coverage? Is it the police now charging the pedophile guy, or just still investigating the case but not yet laid the charge? This makes some difference, because when the police still working on this case, you expose the police procedure, but not yet charged for that target guy.
Right.
This is high risk for the news organization to bear some legal liability.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a high risk. I'm going to put Ludmilla on the spot here. Let's just have a close look at this specific story with the individual. No, the one you're on. Okay. With the individual anonymized the way he is. That all it says is pedo police claim doctor lured 13-year-old, and then the cut line is RCMP investigating condemn vigilante tactics. So the question to Ludmilla, you get a client comes to you and says, we don't want your editorial judgment. Legally, are we fine with that?
No, I don't think so. And a couple of things strike me. One is, I find this a bit more indicative of somebody's identity than saying principal or doctor to your question. I mean, and I take the point about somebody could go and investigate and link the two together, but this is, but for missing the eyes and the nose and the mouth, like this is the person. So I think this is more sort of an in-your-face, if a judge at the end of the day were ever to find that this person had nothing to do with luring 13-year-olds or anything like that, he or she would say, really, but you've identified this person as the person who's tainted by that context. The other thing, and this is somewhat beyond your control as the news organization, it's the people who thought to name themselves pedopolice, not Dan, but there's a certain, it's even worse in a way than creep catchers, because if you look at it quickly and it's pedopolice claim doctor lured 13-year-old, it actually resonates more as maybe this is the wing of the RCMP who's investigating this sort of crime, because then right underneath it is RCMP investigating condemned vigilante tactics, but you don't really know. I mean, they could be just doing the investigation. This could be the branch of the police doing the investigation of the doctor.
Even the name pedopolice
The name is part of the defamation.
problematic.
Yeah, it's true.
Problematic.
It's true. And I guess, the other thing is, two other things. The online chat portion of this, the publication of it, I think you'd probably be okay, but this is the sort of thing, I think you as opposed to pedopolice would be okay, but this is the sort of thing that was found to breach privacy. The posting, even if it's a chat with a decoy, in the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner's decision from the summer, which I hasten to add, apparently Creep Catchers is challenging because their head has called the commissioner an idiot. But in any event, so this is the sort of thing that was found to breach privacy. Now, the Creep Catchers didn't benefit from a journalistic exemption from privacy legislation, and of course you're not doing the direct collection of the information, but there is that issue as well. And then I would say this concern is much lower than the others, but to the point we talked very briefly about early on about from the perspective of pedopolice, is being called a vigilante good or bad? And probably I suspect pedopolice think that's a good thing. From the perspective of some organizations, being called a vigilante and might not be. And of course, this is the organization, not a particular person or an identifiable person within the organization. So there might be a very low risk all around of a defamation claim based on calling somebody a vigilante, but that's just something to bear in mind. The flip side of all this resonates a bit as well.
Wendy, do you have thoughts running through your head?
No, I mean, my approach to this would be the same as it has been with creep catchers, which is, to me, the nub of this is, do you have a doctor out there that's abusing his patients, specifically his teenaged patients? Is that doctor? What is the information that I, as a journalist, can bring to bear to discover whether that's true? Because if I'm just reporting on what pedopolice is saying, there's too much of a layer between me and the information that I'm trying to give to the public. I don't really care what pedopolice has done, unless the police come out and say, based on the video evidence that pedopolice has provided to us, we have gone and arrested this guy. Otherwise, I have nothing to suggest that anything pedopolice does is got any kind of standards that I'm comfortable with. I'm happy to look at their stuff and see if there's any place I can take it, but as far as pedopolice is concerned, and as far as creep catchers is concerned, I don't really care.
We have a question in the audience, sir.
Just kind of to tie this into the current reporting on like Me Too movement, sort of the flip side of this, and I've heard people kind of discuss how many. So the question about like the prominence of the individual. How prominent are they, and how does that play into it? I know they're probably more likely to sue because they have more reputation, but they're also more likely to have access to people who they could continue perpetrating against if they're doing it. And also, how do you weigh in the number of accusations and how widely, like, let's just say there's a random Facebook post that names a bunch of people with multiple charges, and it's shared like X million times. Like, I know that's not legally any rationale, but from a news perspective, you can see how the more people are talking about it and the news is silent, people are saying, well, what's going on here? And so they can get all their information from Facebook and not
Right.
actually have it verified. It's a conundrum, but how would you weigh that and the different kind of sides of that?
Yeah, that's interesting. Kirk, Wendy, like, if this individual, instead of being a doctor we've never heard of before, was some very significant British Columbia celebrity, does that make you less likely to pursue it or more likely to pursue it?
I think you end up pursuing it, like a celebrity is gonna have much less, we're talking about potentially abusing a child. This doctor's gonna come into contact with a whole lot more vulnerable people potentially than some celebrities. So in this case, I think that's more important. But the problem still remains. You've got to do the basic journalism, which is have firsthand sources. And if your source is just a Facebook post that you haven't been able to confirm, then I don't think you can go hanging journalism on something like that. You need to get some firsthand. So in the case of the celebrity, you're gonna have to go to the celebrity, find out from them. You're gonna have to try and verify who the people are that are accusing them and talk to them directly. Like, we don't just quote from Facebook posts from people that we haven't actually made contact with.
I mean, I think there's some interesting tensions, right? With, say, a public figure, say a politician, who would be ensnared in something like an allegation like this. There's the kind of pursuit of the hypocrisy, the public figure who speaks of family values and is found anything but. In the case of a celebrity, I think it's the it's the giant killing tendency that we can get sometimes in media, which is that somebody who has enormous wealth and popularity and success has clearly a dark side that we want to some degree to chop that person down and because we see a sense of justice in all of this. And then with doctors, police officers, those that are in institutions, we look at the sense of the abuse of trust, and I'm far more concerned with abuse of trust than almost anything else, because for the most part, with that scenario, you're dealing with far more vulnerable people. Not that these other cases don't involve vulnerable people, but in cases of abuse of trust, that's where I would probably place the highest value in terms of trying to get to a greater understanding of the case and then explore it. But all of these cases, all of those scenarios are pathways for us to have larger discussions around behavior, around psychology, around abuse, and done properly. And I think it's an open question on whether everything's being done properly at the moment, but we'll go with it. Done properly, it's a very valuable contribution that media make. Done improperly, it's about as horrid an abuse of our own trust that we have with the public that we can present. And I've seen so many reckless cases over the years that I think the older you get, potentially the more conservative that you get about these types of things, because you've seen the consequences of what happens to individual reputations when you play a little fast and loose.
We're just going to do, we have just one question, and then should we?
Yes, then I'm going to have
Okay.
we'll add on here.
Hello. Hi. Just wearing the editor's cap for a moment, I would agree that the pedophile police source itself is not newsworthy, but if it was a doctor, College of Physicians, they say they confirmed there was a complaint from a female who's been suspended. First, I was surprised the college would confirm that under privacy grounds of the doctor. But, of course, a position of authority makes it newsworthy, and also it didn't mention what age the complainant was. The College of Physicians, the legal consent age now is 16. So if she was 14 or 45, that would be an important factor in deciding whether to combine that information with that to do that. And the second thing is for Dan, would the new responsible communication defense help in any of this?
Well, say a couple of things, valid points. The responsible communication defense would require a whole lot more research than has gone into this, including going to the person and getting his side of the story. That's kind of essential to that. So I think you're nowhere near that defense at this stage. What I'd like to do just is introduce this question where really the theme of the night really has to do with sort of online, social media, all of that. So, let's say that the story that we're looking at runs. Let's say that it's no, not yet. Let's say that it's that it is the doctor is more thoroughly anonymized, for example. One of the issues that arises from time to time with different stories that are online is do you leave them open for comments or not? Reader comments. I'm guessing this is a story you wouldn't do that. I mean, there's certain ones that you just don't do because you get abusive comments. There's certain stories that would be dangerous because you just don't know. Is somebody going to, you've gone to the trouble of trying to not identify the person.
I think at least
and the comment does it.
I think at least you moderate comments.
Right.
You moderate them. But I'd agree. Most likely in this case, you just would close them.
Right.
It wouldn't be worth your time to go through them because you're very unlikely to find anything that is going to add to the issue, add value to the issue, in which case, last time I checked, very few of us had those resources.
Right. And related to that issue, now you can go to the next one. Thank you.
So now the story's been posted to the CBC News website, and it's on Facebook, which allows comments because you can't block Facebook comments on anything that you post.
Terrible layout of the public broadcaster's website.
Yeah, so that's one of the considerations. If you are an organization that has a Facebook presence, and not all media organizations do, but if you are one, you have to be live too. If I'm going to post a story there, you actually can't turn off comments. You can individually go through and deal with specific comments on a sort of one-by-one basis, but you have to be prepared for a flood that might be a bit overwhelming. So what do we have here?
So Christopher Lyons says, "I know this pervert, Dr. Victor Fromm, lock him up." And then we have just Dorothy saying that this is disgusting.
Right. So that's I'm not sure how many people in your organizations kind of have to wrestle with that reality if you're going to Facebook a story or not.
An amazing number of news organizations in this country outsource the moderation of their comments to a company, I believe they're based in Winnipeg, called ICUC. And it's not just Canadian organizations. A lot of the, MSNBC does it, I believe, too. There are few do it, and they sit there all day long and time delay your comments, and they try to be the arbiters of it. And I know a few organizations, vested with them for years the responsibility of that, and I just couldn't imagine in a million years doing that as an editor. I mean, I think because I take things like this to be absolutely the equivalent of us publishing it. I mean, you have to take, I think, the full responsibility because it's a public-facing element of your organization. And I know that CBC took a very long time around this. They were also, I think, sending their comments out to ICUC, as was CTV, and they decided that there are even certain themes that they will not let comments take place on. So climate change, Indigenous issues, they're just not open for business on this. Immigration, because again, there's so little evidence that the public is helping illuminate any of these issues with its commentary, and because of the ridiculous amount of anonymity that is still permitted with social media, even with Facebook, and people still somehow disguising who they are. It's been one of the worst episodes of the last generation. It's taken reputations down, and it's hurt us as a craft. I mean, I don't know what we were thinking when we ever let this genie out of the bottle.
I think it was called audience engagement, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We were thinking about the same way we were when we thought it was a good idea to give our news away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so on any given story, you're going to have this issue about comments or not. You're going to have an issue about if you're going to Facebook it. You have to kind of put up with the fact that there's going to be comments, so you might choose otherwise. But just generally speaking, Ludmilla, can you kind of give a bit of a summary of where the law is on liability for comments?
So, there are a few cases that have been decided lately, and I think one of them very helpfully noted that the law on this is evolving, so stay tuned. I think where on balance things land is that there's been an acceptance, say, if you happen to be the National Post and are, I say that mindfully because that was the subject of one of the cases, and you're receiving thousands and thousands of comments, there's a sense that you're not going to be able realistically to go through everyone and vet before it goes up. But if something's drawn to your attention as being wrong in a comment, if somebody lets you know there's something defamatory or alleges it's defamatory, you have to spring into action and deal with it. If you're a person who puts something on your Facebook page, and say you're an individual and you have some controversial opinions of your own and are, you're trying to spark an engagement through comments from people who you expect are going to have a similar view as you do, and you end up having comments that are just as defamatory as your own. There seems to be an expectation of the courts that you may actually be responsible, even without being told, oh, there's a defamatory comment on your page. You may have deliberately engaged in something that prompts the defamation. You may be mindful of the defamation in a sense, or taken to be mindful of it, even without having your attention drawn to it. So I think from the perspective of the broader media, it's a spring into action when you're told of something. From the perspective of somebody who is generating their own defamatory content and inviting more through comments, they may have a greater obligation to look. And Dan, you may have a more current sense of things, but
No, I think you've summarized it really well. I mean, that there's a certain amount of sympathy from the courts where you have an overwhelming sort of number of things, and you act very quickly. I mean, in the National Post case, it was within 48 hours, everything that was complained of was down, and that was out of, I don't know, they were getting 10,000 a month or something like that. So, and now it's many times that. But the so the court acknowledged that certain things are unrealistic. Weirdly, like the law and common sense don't often align very well. And weirdly, if you the rule was, the only thing I would add to what Ludmilla said is, if regardless of whether somebody's brought it to your attention or not, if it just so happens you know about a comment because you're an opinion writer and you love reading your own comments or reading the comments of people on your piece, or if some staffer brings it to your attention or whatever, once you know, you got to deal with it. You have published it at that point. You're liable for it, and so moderating in a weird way makes you more liable.
Yeah,
I mean, but it still might be best practices, and you have to.
We have a great example in the city. I mean, I think Kim Boland's Real Scoop, the blog, and I mean, it started rather innocently but it became a kind of an electronic town hall for gang members and like all kinds of very shady types to all talk about each other. It was like an intelligence briefing day by day. And it's remarkable. And look, there are loads of things in there that, I mean, I suppose they're actionable, if you want to call it that. I mean, and when you're dealing with gangs, actionable is very different than, what we mean.
Getting sued would be a
Yeah,
gentle,
suit
a gentle
would be,
alternative.
I'll take that. But I mean, it's an incredible kaleidoscope of what's taking place in that situation. And I know that the legal advice we got very early on with that was you can engage it. You can engage it a bit, and because ultimately it's like a bipartisan agreement that no one's going to actually deal with it. Police are going to leave it alone. Gang members don't care if everybody's kind of just weighing in and like it's kind of how do I put it, a condoned free-for-all, right? But most of the free-for-alls are not condoned. So.
Well, let's move on to the next. Hang on. Is there a question before we do? Yeah.
Regarding comments, is it possible to try to protect yourself by telling people that we won't accept comments if you don't give us your real name so we can follow up with you and see who you are? Because if you don't have anonymity, it's harder for you to be racist or prejudiced or whatever.
No, it's not. There are a number of groups have moved to we don't allow anonymous comments, but then the question is how rigorously, or in most cases not, are they actually checking up on anybody's real identity? Yeah. And that's where it becomes,
Yeah, in a more innocent time, we used to phone people back at their houses to check if the letter that we received, it's so quaint, very, I'm amazed that nothing really terrible happened with that one because, like that's a foolproof mechanism. But these days, wildidiot99@gmail.com. It's like, it's a handle that we're like, wildidiot99's out there again, and I just think it's you're way better to steer clear. Again, it's the harm minimization thing. Like at some point, that public interest is not a real public interest. It's your own, it's your audience engagement or page view interest, and I think you have to park that once in a while.
I'm wondering about the legality of the video that was posted this summer. The family's visiting Steveston. The girl gets pulled into the water by the seal. So publishing that story was innocent enough. It's just this is a video that's gone viral. But then what happened is everybody weighing in on the parenting of the parents, and so then it becomes: are you being defamed because you've been told you're a terrible parent and you don't care about your children and children's services? So this is not the story that you originally reported on, but then it becomes this other issue, and the family is saying, we're gonna sue the fellow who took this video and posted it on YouTube. What's the legality?
I don't think the video, unless there were a privacy issue, and I'm not sure about the given the purpose and journalistic purpose. I'm not sure. One thing that occurred to me was you could identify, except for the girl, I suppose, from the back, who it was, and I'm not sure about that. I think the story, the video in itself isn't defamatory. It's in an odd way. It's the fact that's perhaps the basis of comment, and you might be then arguing a fair comment thing on, everybody sees the facts on which people's opinions are being expressed. I can know, and so I don't think the story itself becomes defamatory because of that. You might have to watch some of the comments, and I think, if it's bad parent, I'd be a bit worried if you're letting the comments go, but.
A little bit. The liberty on opinions is very, very wide, and it doesn't have to be fair, even though it's called fair comment.
True.
So somebody could be posting idiot, stupidest parents I've ever seen, and if somebody said to me, "Are we going to be legally in the glue on that?" I'd be saying no. If they,
I mean-
if they put something factual, I know these people and this is just like them to do something like this, then you're into a whole
Yeah.
other category.
Yeah, I mean, it's extreme to suggest that you can get, or that you need something like informed consent from a 2-year-old, to carry the video. But I'll tell you a case where when I was ombudsman at the CBC, locally it set up a situation in which it sent some minors into a restaurant to be served alcohol. And this is not the first time a story like this has been tried. That being said, they then interviewed the young people who were served, because I think they went to 4 places they got served. They were offered service at 2, and somebody complained, and it eventually came to me as the ombudsman, and I thought, I think there's a point here. The point is, because the CBC said, no, we talked to these young people, we got their permission to identify them, and they talked openly, and even though they were 15 and 16 years old. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but you're not getting informed consent. You're getting their seeming consent, but they have no idea, and you've just taken advantage of something in which they have an inability to assess the long-term consequences of having their faces on camera to talk about breaking a law consciously. Do you think that it might hurt them one day if they decide to apply at a restaurant for a service job? Might somebody look them up online? Because they were named. It was the other thing too. It's kind of a little unusual. They were named. You look up a name, which every employer in the world now does, and say, oh, you pulled a fast one on that restaurant on the other side of town. Gee, good luck finding work. So, and I think the CBC kind of had a bit of a fit about as being too much of a purist and all that. But I will say that's one of those critical questions that comes with dealing with vulnerable people, or people who are even inexperienced, people who have language challenges. There are a lot of issues that journalists don't take the time to say, am I really imposing myself in a great way on these people? And have I missed the whole point about their inability to provide me with informed consent? It's a very loaded term. I'm sure you guys, there's literature on this. But from my standpoint, I think we often go way over to the other side at times and don't act reflexively around this. We go for something like this, and it has its consequences.
Good points, but I need to bring us back to the story.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing about this slide before we move on? And it's just, since we're on the CBC, and it's the CBC website, of course, pedo police serve up evidence of online learning. Too much, in my view, on the side of there's actually
Something wrong. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point not to miss. Let's go to the next one.
Do you think it should be like anonymous man defends himself? What exactly is it?
So there's a new development. There's an email from Kathy to Wendy Cox. We went to the doctor's door. A woman answered, but quickly shut the door. I suspect it's his wife. We have a clip of her saying, it's fake news and you're getting duped right into it. Can we use this? So it's a video clip.
This is kind of a shorty, but Wendy, I guess use this is can you use a picture of the guy's house, or at least that relatively narrow shot of part of his house, and with this person who lived there might have used.
Well, again, at this point in the story, because as news editor, whatever I am,
The story's going
I've
a little
already
further
said,
than you would have
yeah,
wanted.
no, I'm still steadfast keeping pedo police out of this, right? So presumably the only reason why in my newsroom we've covered this is because we have determined on our own that the College of Physicians and Surgeons has suspended this guy, and it's for child luring. We have independently determined that. So Kathy's now at this doctor's door, and I'm assuming that we have pulled his property records and we know where he lives. And she's knocked on the door, and a woman answers. She said, I suspect it's his wife. Well, probably, but we don't know that, and her suspicions aren't going to help us with that. So we can't call her his wife. It's fake news and you're getting duped right into it. Can we use this? I think we can, but we can't identify her as his wife. It's just a woman who answered the door at his house, isn't it?
And made.
Well, but yeah, but it's a woman who answers the door at his house.
I mean, it is a, in a funny sort of way, it is a balancing comment in the sense of
It is.
on the other side of the spectrum.
Right, yeah.
But we don't even know the context of what she is saying here.
Right.
Is it an answer to, I understand the guy who lives here,
Right.
you know, has, you know, is somehow accused of being a pedophile. I mean, so we don't know, and I'd need a lot more information on that. I wouldn't. I wouldn't ever run the photo. It may look like a bit of a generic household, but people in the neighborhood would know instantly whose house that was. I think that it would take a lot to really get to that point, and I think we're not at the point of a criminal conviction. And I think that while people are before the courts, that they are entitled to a degree of some privacy. And unless the court is going to identify the residence and say, or that there is a police search at a particular residence, or that somebody is under some form of house arrest at a particular residence with police protection, then I'm not touching that one.
Yeah, I've on occasion, had concerns in stories where, there's some sort of allegation or suggestion somebody has done something really bad, like something sexual, say. Pretty dicey to be identifying where they live, because the image in my mind is some guys deciding to go teach them a lesson,
Right.
and then it's kind of on you. So,
And you may have children in the household. You may have enough said.
okay, let's pop to the next slide.
So now the Pedopolice website has used a screenshot of the Vancouver Sun's article, and it says the Vancouver Sun finally got on board to help spread the word about this pedophile Dr. Victor Frun. Let's hope they throw away the key. So this is now on their website.
So Ludmilla,
Milla, help us out.
somebody
We're in
has now grabbed your client's copyrighted material and is using it. Do you ever have to? Well, I won't have to ask you if you have to deal with it, but what are their options apart from just live with it?
Yeah, I mean, I was envisioning in my mind writing a letter to Pedopolice, but somehow this won't go well, and they won't respect the letter. I'm pretty sure, and they'll
probably publish it.
They'll publish it, and then they'll probably say that the Vancouver Sun sympathizes with pedophiles because they want their story off or something like that. So
We take a camera to their office and we show the webmaster publishing it. Breaking the law. Yeah.
So this isn't so much a legal reaction on my part. It's just a gut sort of I can see things going awry. At the same time, I'm terribly tempted to try to vindicate copyright here, but I don't know if enough good would come of it to warrant the effort.
Can on a bigger picture? Can you? Oh, Lalit, can you jump in first?
Could you get a takedown notice with the ISP?
Yeah.
Contact the ISP and say this is copyright material, get it down, and you don't even deal with the Pedopolice?
You can try and do that.
The problem is in Canada, you don't have much of that, right? I mean, the USC, the DMCA notices all the time, and things come down. I haven't had much luck in Canada as far as them being obliged. I mean, there's an immunity there if they follow the rules under that legislation. Maybe ours will catch up as far as that goes. There's a certain amount of notice. What I'd like to do is just take this little piece and flip it to a bigger question. What is the law, or what should we be aware of with respect to either grabbing somebody else's screenshot of something somebody else has, whether it's part of a YouTube video that's viral, the kid getting nabbed, for example, that you don't own, or somebody grabbing something of yours Is it always a breach of copyright? Are there times when you can use it? That's a big one. I'm hoping for like a 30-second answer, of course. But.
Well, I was reviewing before. There's the reality of it so often happens, and there might be a bit of safety in numbers that it's just happening that you tag along. I was looking through the exceptions in the copyright to the fact that it's really the generator of the product who has the right to use and determine how it's going to be used. And there are some fair dealing exceptions. There are some educational and research exceptions. There are not for commercial use kind of exceptions. And I'm not quite sure where pedopolice, for example, would land. And so, I'm sure they try to take a crack at it. I mean, they for example, tried to argue that they were a journalistic group in front of the privacy commissioner, but I don't know, and I don't know if the law is developed in terms of crystallizing where it falls and how far you can get into the exceptions that arise. And you, I suspect, will have a better sense of it. But
yeah, I mean, news fair dealing is almost always the question, and whether it's integral to the story and whether you're using a reasonably modest amount of it and so forth. But that's always. I mean, it's hard to generalize.
In the early days of Facebook, before people really understood how to basically preserve some privacy, and we just found it was like open season at the Vancouver Sun. Almost everybody who was charged had some kind of glorious personal page with a bunch of semi-lewd photos that made it just case closed before the person ever got to court. When we ran these photos, they were incriminating beyond compare, and proudly so, seemingly. It was very weird. Now that doesn't happen as much.
We do have one question in the audience, sir.
Oh, there's two.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
We'll take this one in first.
Did the Vancouver Sun have permission to grab that from the Pedo Police website?
Oh, I see. Okay.
What's the difference?
They grabbed their Facebook.
So that was from a live
exactly.
stream originally, right?
That's a very good point. It's this double-edged sword. I mean, the extent to which you can be aggressive with somebody else's material and call it, let's say, fair dealing, is going to be the very same extent to which they can grab your material and call it the same thing. Like so, you're going to live and die by the same sword.
Mine was kind of the same thing, but jumping off of that, fair dealing seems to be a moving target for the argument. So, given how long we've been making this argument, why are there no guidelines yet in the Canadian legal system and with regards to copyright as to what fair dealing actually entails? Because it's really make it up as you go.
Yeah. There's the courts would say, well, it's all extremely fact specific, right? It's how significant was the piece to the original piece, but you'd have apart from the statement of the broad principles, you'd have trouble reconciling a lot of different cases. Whether it's the Da Vinci Code case or or any other one. There was one involving certain 2 paragraphs of a 7-paragraph article, and was that okay? Anyways, so it's you just have to make your call on the individual situation.
And it's an interesting risk assessment too, from the perspective, very briefly, as assistant editor of The Advocate as opposed to lawyer for a publication, because being a lawyer, I go before letting anything in my editorial capacity to the terms and conditions of the various news websites, and I was trying to figure out if a paragraph could get in of a particular piece that appeared on the CBC website, and I was so horrified by the consequences that could befall me if I did anything without permission and paying money that, of course, I did it. But it's a bit of a, some people they can count on, no doubt, to self-police and abide by this sense of risk that's different from the population at large.
Well, and you never know the sensitivities on the other side. And Carolyn from the Sun sent me reminded me of a situation that we talked about some time back, where there was a grab of an Instagram page, I think it was, and it was just a regular kind of news piece, and then all of a sudden the photo that was on there was by a professional photographer who took it very seriously. I think I've got that roughly correct. Pay my money. Like, what's going on? And have to deal with those. So sometimes people could care less. Other times they you never really know what the backstory is and whether they're going to take a run at you.
We did have one more question, and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
In terms of this particular image, if you were to make the fair dealing argument that you need this image in order to be able to tell the story fully, could that then be used against you to say that you're identifying the person? Because if the image is that germane to telling the story, then it's because you're identifying the person?
Well, that's a very good point, because your argument presumably be, well, gee, it's one of the W's. I mean, who? So, but if you're claiming you haven't identified them, you've kind of made the point pretty eloquently that well, then why are you using this image that supposedly doesn't tell you the W? All I can say is I think that's correct. You'd have trouble justifying why that's integral to the story if it's not actually conveying information.
And the public interest depends on your perspective.
Right. What I'd like to do, actually, the next slide, we basically covered all the questions in our discussion as it's kind of moved along. So we can actually move right past that into the next episode that the pedo police are going to be announcing.
Yeah, so there's a second incident on their Twitter. They say, "We busted a new one, a whopper. You're welcome. Check it." And then they link to their Instagram, and they're saying that teen idol Ryan Red, 17, from the TV show Gang of Five. Now you can see the creep he really is. That's him on the left trying to hide after arriving to meet 12-year-old Jessica after a steamy online chat. And that's him on the right from his Central High School yearbook. You're done now, dude. So there's the picture on the left that they caught, and then that's the yearbook picture. And now we have an email from Kirk to Ludmilla and Wendy about this new bust. The pedo police have gone public with another one. This time it's a teen celebrity, Ryan Red. Check their Instagram page. My source at PP tells me the police have questioned Red, but no charges. I had a run-in with IDing a young offender once. Don't want to mess up. But there are no charges, and this story is all over social media. Can I name him? If not, can we just run links to the pedo police online postings about Red without naming him?
Who is this Kurt guy? What on earth is he doing as an editor?
Okay, so interesting question. We all I think know that somebody is charged as a young offender. That triggers a statutory ban on identifying them. There's no charges here. This person, if there ever was charges, would be in that category because of his age. So where do we stand, Ludmilla?
So I think my dominant reaction to this would be the same as in the case of the doctor. So there are lots of reasons other than the Youth Criminal Justice Act to be cautious here. And, I stared at the wording of the act trying to see if there was a good additional reason from it. And it really does refer to people who are dealt with under that act. So I don't think it provides an answer flat out. But there are the same reasons for caution here. You're accusing somebody of being a creep who hides, so has perhaps something to hide. You're clearly having a defamatory message if he didn't turn out to have committed any offenses down the road. And so I think there are the cautions that I'd have in any event. In terms of a link to the pedo police online, I mean, it depends what you're doing with the link. So if it's just, your story is about the pedo police and you have a See Pedo Police website, and it's just a question of the hyperlink. And then at the other end of the hyperlink, once you click on it, you get the pedo police website with all sorts of potentially defamatory things on it. You're probably not going to be responsible for as having published something defamatory at the other end. And Dan has, I think, the leading case still in Canada on this called Crooks and Newton in terms of when is having a hyperlink publication for defamation purposes. And so generally speaking, I think it would be like a footnote, and you don't generally get dinged in defamation for having a footnote that you're citing. I think the more you're packing into the content of the article as itself defamatory and a lead up and but for the fact that we're a little bit chicken, we would have been publishing this as the picture of a predator who happens to be a teen and he's a celebrity. The more that you're actually, that's your way of conveying defamatory content, the more exposed you might be. But I think my first reaction to this more generally would be defamation. I'm concerned about that, and the Youth Criminal Justice Act is an interesting angle, but not even if you were totally fine under that act, I would still be concerned.
I mean, the kernel of truth in this thing is that we actually did have an issue. When I was at the Hamilton Spectator, we consciously identified not a young offender, but the youth criminal record of an adult offender. And we did so deliberately. We did so in the absence of the police going before a judge to gain the erasure of, or the avoidance of a publication ban on that youth criminal record. This was a man who, I think he was 19 at the time. He had had dozens of convictions as a youth offender, and since he went into the adult system, had had 3 convictions in his first year and 57 charges withdrawn when he had the 3 convictions. And he breached his probation the instant that he came out of prison, and he avoided police. He went at large in the community, and we were able to have surveillance on police radio at that time in Hamilton, and knew that the police were referring to him by a particular code that is there for the person who is most dangerous to the community. And we were surprised the police weren't going before a judge to say, wait a minute, let's tell the community the entire story, because they had in fact done so when he was a youth offender, and in order to do that. And so we kept wrestling with this all day long, and we waited for the courts to close and police to tell us that they hadn't gone before the judge, even though they were pretty well putting out every half hour a bulletin about who this guy was and where he last might have been seen. So we consciously chose to identify him, tell the whole story of his juvenile criminal record. And you make a lot of enemies as an editor in any community, so it took about 3 or 4 weeks for somebody to lay a complaint, which the police then had to investigate, and it led to charges against me and the publisher and I think 4 of our reporters, which then began this protracted investigation by the police. They used it as an opportunity to determine what all of our attitudes were toward the police department. They put some of our reporters into rooms for 2 and 3 hours at a time, with stuff like this. So finally, all the charges were withdrawn against everybody but me. And by good fortune, I wound up before a judge in Toronto who had this young man before him, where his defense lawyer had assured the judge that he was never going to offend again. And I think within a couple of days, he was out stealing from clothing stores. So the judge was in no mood to entertain the idea, and so I got an absolute discharge. But it was an interesting case, and I still would do it.
How did you get the record in the first place?
Oh no, because because at one point while he was a juvenile, the police successfully got a court to eliminate the publication ban on his record. So the full record was available to us. The paper had in fact published all of this. I mean, he was kind of a human crime spree, right? He was one of these guys who threatened a 10-year-old with a gun, ran a stolen car through the fence of a detention center to spring his girlfriend loose, boasted about wanting to die in a shootout with police. I mean, and he wrote me an email while all this was going on. It was quite fascinating. And he said, yeah, you've kind of made my life a little miserable. And then 2 nights later, he was in London, Ontario. He like looted a store overnight with some friends and got away with like $30,000 worth of men's clothing. He seemed to have a predilection for men's clothing stores. So he wound up back, charged again. And I have no idea where he is now. I hope he's not in the audience. But it was an interesting case at the time.
Yeah. So.
No.
Wendy, I was going to ask you, so in your either Globe or CP, or is there a practice when you're dealing with somebody who is underage, so you got in this case, you got a 17-year-old, an allegation that if it led to criminal charges would mean a young offender ban, either because of that possibility, or just because of his age, would you identify if the story was worthy? Assume that. Would you identify? Would you not identify because of age or possibility of a ban coming into place later?
We had this. Justin Bieber got into a skirmish in Richmond?
Yeah.
In Nanaimo. Yeah, at a laser tag place. And he was underage at the time. Celebrity. Social media just lit up with who it was. And police weren't identifying him. And ultimately, I was at CP at the time. And James, I'm right? We didn't identify him for the longest time. Everyone else did because they had sources. They had people there at the laser tag game, and the kid's family. That's right. Yeah, but I don't think at CP we identified him because our lawyer's advice, clearly not yours, was that we couldn't. And you run into that problem with celebrities where you're following the rules and nobody else is. So you just end up looking stupid.
Anyways, it's a question that I asked and I put it in here because it comes to me from time to time, which is, well, there's no ban. Why can't we identify this burning story? I mean, maybe the Beavers is one of the better examples of that, where it's everywhere. Nobody's charged at this point, So, have they been? Lidmel is right. The language of the young offenders legislation is dealt with. Does that mean charged or something short of being charged? Like if they're pulled in for questioning, or have they been dealt with? I don't know.
I think with young offenders, notwithstanding this case, I think you have to be very mindful again about the issue of harm minimization and what you're dealing with in terms of someone who has the capacity to deliberate over crime. And the law's been very clear about who falls into that category and who doesn't. And so again, do you risk, in a way, re-victimization in some cases? In the Hamilton case, we felt we couldn't stand idly by because we felt that the public was in some danger. And in this case here, you have to ask, that would be one of the questions we would ask, is the public in danger in all of this? So do we need to run great risk in identification?
But then in this case, is the public in danger? He's a 17-year-old superstar who, presumably because of his status, is going to have sway over young kids or young girls. Is he a risk then? Does that come into it?
Yeah.
Because of his status?
Yeah.
I think I'm phoning Ludmilla.
It's the Weinstein defense. The Weinstein defense.
Well, the Weinstein issue, of course, is that his position of power. It's the power dynamic that you're dealing with there. So, what kind of access does he have to that power to determine someone's career, and what is he prepared to deal with? And in this case here, it can be the same issue. Promise of a job, promise of being part of a television show. What is it that can potentially be on the line in these cases? And I think those are calculations that you make when you're determining whether to proceed is whether the power is being abused.
Let's move to the next slide and see what's happening with this story.
So Kathy has found a video clip. She says, Kirk found this clip of Ryan Red on his TV show, looking so noble. Please, oh please, can we use 30 seconds of this in the online story?
Hypocrisy.
I'll never ask for anything
So much.
again.
Well, the first thing you're doing is going over to your desk and saying, don't send me emails like that. Don't write that down.
Yeah, first of all, yeah.
It's on a sticky.
Well, it's on a sticky, yeah. Is that a transitory note?
Yeah, what are you doing writing emails like this? Yeah.
So, what's your reaction, Kirk? Kathy's wants to do. I guess you're doing some version of this story, and she wants to use some YouTube from a commercial movie. Is there ever a scenario where you'd say, yeah, use a few seconds as long as the lawyer approves it, or would you always be like, come on?
First of all, just the actual use of a video like that is, in the end, not going to be a determinant, I think, of whether you're running information like this. The fact that you can ladle on an image or two that deal with that. The only again, it's just in a hypothetical situation. In the event that this person were somehow a campaigner for equality, or it had some kind of political stake adjacent to his celebrity status that positioned him as some sort of icon around a cause, particularly in this case being around sexual equality, then I just think this doesn't have the relevance for me to bring it forward. It's not like it's a hidden piece of material. It would be part of the well-known body of work of this person, and so for us to do it,
What if the clip was him from his TV show hitting on some 16-year-old girl? Is that worse or better?
Boy, that's a terrible question. Look, I mean, how many times do we do that? We do it a ton, where we love the idea that, there's a reference in this person's creative work that goes there.
Yeah.
And, I needn't tell people about some of the cases in Canada that where journalists scoured a great deal in order to try to find that. And, do we look smart in doing that? I suppose it makes us feel better, but ultimately it doesn't do much in terms of evidence.
Okay, well, one way or another, a story has been done, and it has partly to do with the fact that the police actually got involved. Can we go to the next slide?
Yeah, so now we have a letter from the RCMP addressed to Wendy. This is to inform you that charges have been laid against one Ryan Red, age 17, under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. We are aware that the Vancouver Sun online edition and other post-media sites have carried several stories identifying this youth over the past 10 to 14 days. The Act prohibits identification of the youth, and we require the Vancouver Sun and all post-media outlets to delete all names, photos, and other identifying information regarding this youth, forthwith under penalty of prosecution. So from Sergeant Ian Hander.
Right. So what that gets us into is somebody who is in the news, a publication ban comes along that wasn't there 2 weeks ago, and do you have to start scrubbing your online archives of the identity to comply with the ban, or do you only need to comply with it on what's in the live stuff going forward? What do you think, Ludmilla?
So, I mean, I have a philosophical position on this, and then I'd have a cautious, what I'd actually probably say, position on this. And the philosophical one is, I'd like to see that articles that are done, wrapped up, you're not continuing to add to them, they're done, they're static, but they're online. I'd like to see them treated in the same way as if you were distributing a physical newspaper. So nobody would send you out to rip pages out of a physical newspaper, hopefully, that's been distributed. And ideally, in my mind, you treat the online publication the same way. That being said, it's still there. It's still somewhat within your control. Now, not entirely within your control, because you then wind up with issues about, cached versions or versions that other people have perhaps replicated, and you can't physically get them back anymore, even though they're online. But I think I'd probably be cautioning some or expressing some caution about perhaps it's a good idea to do what we can in terms of abiding by the RCMP request for stories. The wording of the Youth Criminal Justice Act talks about shall publish. Arguably, you've already published and it's gone. But to the extent you've still got control over it, it's on your website. Is it worth the fight? Unless this is a particularly key issue where you want to take this as a test case to court, is it really worth the fight to sort of push back at the police. I don't know. So there's a real tension here, and I'm not. I'd be cautious about not abiding by the police request.
The impact is already done anyway. The impact is done. It's been out there for 10 to 14 days. So abiding the police, having first, of course, called the lawyer and asked for every possible way to get some sort of a bill of health here to proceed. In the absence of that, I think it's pretty impossible for them to put the genie back in the bottle on this one. And so I'm very surprised that it would have taken this long to kind of run up to this point. But I don't like, as a principle, to erase history. I think it's pretty dangerous. I don't think it was contemplated when everybody began to use the internet this way, that there would be this permanent record that we would have to then reconsider at times. And I do believe that in some cases media have gotten away with besmirching people and leaving the record out there and never getting to the point of correcting it. So I get all of that, but I don't like the idea of kind of what feels like a retroactive publication ban, as opposed to something that goes forward where we will not mention it from here on in. First of all, technically it's not possible to scrub. There's always a cache somewhere, and there's always someone going to do it. And social media, the second that you do that, you're waving the red, it's the red flag with the bull. So,
right, yeah, and reeling in shared versions and all of that is.
Oh,
it's going to be.
Yeah.
We have a question from the audience.
So if you've already done that, you've made the decision that you're not going to scrub, you're going to leave those stories up. Do the subsequent stories, do you leave the name out, given that, horses have left the barn?
I think the subsequent stories you have to leave the name out.
Yeah.
I mean, that way you've got the fact that it's no utility to really scrub the name isn't going to be a defense to charges under the Youth Criminal Justice Act when you breach the section. So I would leave it.
Obviously, at a certain point, there will be representations made to perhaps place this alleged offender before adult court, and that becomes a whole other matter. So, and I think, again, I would be pressing council to try to find any possible way for us to be able to continue to do our work without this sort of a publication ban. But in the absence of something that's successful that way, I do think you have not much choice. Again, with one proviso that I go back to that old case with us. If he's deemed somehow to be a public threat and he's at large, then I think you'd ask yourself a couple of more questions about it before you'd stop.
Isn't there also a problem, though, with committing to try and scrub things, that by doing that, you've committed essentially to the court that you're going to erase this successfully, and there's no way that you could.
No.
So why, it's like the comments, if you start moderating some of them, there's an expectation that you've moderated all of them, and you're actually better off in not getting into the fiction in the first place.
I think if you were to do it, you'd have to set out some parameters to the police, we don't accept we're under an obligation to. We're willing to try, but please understand this isn't going to work. Something like that, just to not set up an expectation, because you're right. And for other cases, so detaching it from this particular case where there's arguably an issue with ongoing publication that might catch you within the bounds of a provision in the Youth Criminal Justice Act. If you're thinking about what to do with a story that's allegedly defamatory, and you're thinking about whether to pull it or start tinkering with it, then you've actually got the extra issue of, are you inadvertently admitting some liability for your conceding it was defamatory by pulling it down? So there's an extra layer as well. That can be done, of course, in certain ways, and if it's a situation where you have to or should, then you just manage the risks. But there is that extra layer too. Because of the potential for the section in the Youth Criminal Justice Act being interpreted as an ongoing publication by you, so again, my philosophical position would be that your publication occurred on a fixed date in the past, and you're no longer engaged in the act of publishing every day that the story remains online. But I think that unless there's a case to the contrary, and I'm not aware of one yet, but there might be, but unless there's a case or a decision where it's been said that, the no person shall publish doesn't catch the situation where you've just left it online, I would err on the side of caution and suggest pulling it.
Yeah, we may be moving toward the European Union era of, the right to be forgotten.
Yeah.
But it hasn't come here yet.
Yeah, well, and I want to go to a bit of that in a moment. Just to alert, there actually is a case that the Supreme Court of Canada has agreed to hear that involves the question of when there is a publication ban, must you scrub your archives? And that involves CBC in Alberta. And they successfully resisted doing that at the court level below, but we'll see. But I was interested, like the point you started segueing to, Kirk, is probably for both you and Wendy, you must get situations in your organizations, past or current, where you get somebody with, in some cases, a pretty compelling story about why you ought to take down a story from 8 years ago.
Yeah, no, we had a great case at CBC in which a woman in Montreal had witnessed police seemingly harassing somebody who had gone over a stoplight and she decided to come on CBC Montreal radio and tell her story and talk about it and identify herself. And what she did not realize, naively I would guess, is that there was going to be an online story written about this and that she would be identified. And a year went by and she was, I think my recollection is that she worked for an architecture firm. And her employer at the time said, wait a minute, we're losing business now. We're losing business because you're identified when they go to take a look at our partners and our people, your name comes up, she had an unusual name. And here you are linked into like complaining about the police, which in Montreal, it's kind of an interesting industry. So it's so she found herself right in the middle, in the crosshairs of this whole issue of, can I get all of this taken down? And interestingly, one of the CBC's responses was she needs to hire a public relations firm to affect the search engine optimization on her name, to pad the first 3 or 4 Google search pages results with stuff that's like Wendy Cox is a wonderful person, and Wendy Cox is,
it's a common strategy.
So I mean that's how crazy it can get with this erasure of history.
We have a question at the back, actually. Sorry.
Is this on? Oh, there we go. So if it's left on there, if a name is left on there in earlier stories, and then a publication ban comes into effect, if it's not the Youth Criminal Justice Act, what about linking to it? Like, so it says a man or a 35-year-old man, and then there's a hyperlink or a link that links to an earlier story? I've seen that done.
Yeah, well, that's where you've got to be really careful because I mean, we've had the defamation decision where hyperlinking wasn't republishing, but if you're taking the position, like Ludmilla enunciated a minute ago, where past publications were not republishing, but now on your today's live story, you've now kind of pulled that story from the past up via hyperlink where you effectively named. I think you put yourself in considerable peril of being found in violation of the ban. That'd be my instinctive response.
Or retweeting.
Yeah,
the story.
Yeah, that's right. You do.
Yeah.
Wendy, do you guys ever get into the somebody has a reason why you need to take down their story and it's compelling enough that you actually
I don't think I've come across that. No. I know that we have had years after the fact, people contact us and say, those charges were dropped.
Yeah.
It has come to my attention that you wrote the original story where I was charged, but you didn't do the story that said that they were dropped. I need you to catch that up. And we have been, at CP, we were compelled to do that.
Yeah. Right. CBC journalistic standards and practices will make mention of the fact that for someone who can make the argument of personal safety. So, for instance, somebody who wants to get away from, say, an abusive spouse, that there will be some of that there will be given consideration to that, revisionist.
in cases where there is a very compelling reason, personal safety reason, they're all very, but in cases where there are one option that I've seen employed, not very often and usually with great reluctance, but kind of trying to balance things, is to de-index the story off Google, keep it on the paper's own archives.
Yeah.
So if somebody actually was dedicated enough to get into the archives and hunt it, they'd still find it, but it's kind of the Google search that everyone fears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We are close to out of time, but I will make sure I'm not missing any questions if there are any out there.
We have a few wrap-up questions. Some of them we've
we've
answered.
Yeah, I think you have up there? Yeah, so
Yeah.
correcting errors published across social media platforms. I mean, we've addressed, or at least started to address this question of there's a high threshold. If you make an error, the days of just being able to publish a correction and it's all nice and clean are long gone. Now the error has been, copied and tweeted, and people have Facebooked it or Instagrammed it, and so reeling in those errors becomes very difficult, and it's a particularly difficult problem if you're in a situation where, let's say, I'm defending a defamation suit, and one of the questions is, well, how many people have read it? Short answer is you don't know. And you have sharing tools on your own website, so it makes it really
But don't you find it interesting that I don't know of an organization that actually publishes its corrections across Twitter and Facebook?
No, I've never seen that. I've seen it online, but
I think it'd be a very interesting thing to try. Which is if you really believe in the value of correction, if you're walking the talk, then why not put them out there? You put the original story out there, for sure. It was shared. Why wouldn't you then say, we made a mistake here?
There's that website out there called Regret the Error.
Yeah.
And I don't know if he addresses that question or not.
No, he's not doing that anymore.
Oh, just not?
No, he's now working for media, probably not making mistakes. Craig's a very good guy, so yeah.
Okay, well, are there any other questions in the audience?
I think we've run.
Yeah, so we're close to 8:30 now. I just want to thank everyone for your thoughtful questions, and a special thank you to our panelists for taking the time out of their busy days to come share their expertise with us. So just to let you guys know, we do this event annually. So there are feedback forms at the table for you to let us know how we did, what we can do better, what you liked, what you didn't like. And if you could leave them on the table after you fill them out, that would be great. And I'd like to invite Nora Newlands, Executive Director of the Jack Webster Foundation, to come up and say a few closing remarks.
I too want to thank the panel on behalf of everybody here. Dan, I think, spends his nights awake trying to figure out the best scenario for this annual Law in the Media seminar, and of course he did a great job tonight. Thank you. And Wendy, thank you too. And Ludmila, that's so nice of you to be here and pass along your expertise. And Kirk, just great expertise as well. So we've been doing this seminar with the Law Society for 16 years now, and it's a great privilege for the Jack Webster Foundation to partner with such an organization to make sure that that the journalists can get answers to legal questions.
And Nora, we're going to miss you at the foundation.
Yeah. Oh. I'm going to cry. 25 years and it's all over, but I wish you all the best. I just wanted to add one more thing. The Webster Awards, they don't come up for a long time, not till you don't submit till the end of June. But as you do your stories over the coming months, think about good ones that are Webster worthy and put them aside and be ready to submit them next year. We'd like to have them. So all the best, and thank you again very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
working